Okay, everybody, welcome back. The last section of this chapter, we've covered a lot of ground talking about labor markets and income. We talked about supply and demand and the complexities of imperfect competition and the role of unions and monopsonies and the persistent issue of employment discrimination. We've covered so much ground. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is immigration. That is the last thing we need to cover. I'm going to try to stay off my soapbox for this one. Immigration. So understanding the movement of people across international borders and what impact that has on the labor market and the broader economy is really important in today's interconnected world. That's a topic that generates a lot of discussion and at times a lot of debate, especially now. It makes it very important to approach this with a solid understanding of the economic principles that underlie the immigration system. All right. Learning outcomes. We want to describe the historical patterns of immigration to the United States, explain the economic impacts of immigration, and analyze the impacts of immigration reform proposals. So the topic of immigration evokes strong feelings. It's interesting to observe that while most Americans deeply value the freedom of movement within our own country borders, the idea of restricting international immigration often finds significant support. This tension frequently arises from concerns about how new arrivals might affect our existing culture, including things like language, family dynamics, and social norms. A significant portion of the debate here revolves around economic impacts, and that's where economic analysis can provide valuable insights. Our focus will be on the effects of immigration on wages, overall income levels, and government budgets. Economists have conducted a lot of research on these topics, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So let's look back at the history of the United States. We can see a distinct historical pattern of immigration. Immigration levels in the U.S. peaked in the early part of the 20th century and then experienced a decline in the mid-century before rising again starting in the 1990s. The origins of immigrants have also shifted dramatically over time. In the early 1900s, the vast majority, around 90% of immigrants, came from Europe. However, by the 2000s, that pattern had reversed with approximately 50% of new immigrants coming from the Americas and about 25% from Asia. So this change in the composition of immigration has had various economic consequences and social consequences. Here's a visual representation of immigration since 1990. As you can see, from 1900. As you can see from the bar graph, the number of immigrants arriving each decade has fluctuated, with notable declines between 1930 and 1950 due to things like the Great Depression and the World War II. But since the latter half of the 20th century, and particularly in recent decades, there has been a sharp increase in the number of immigrants coming to the United States to live the American dream, to pursue the American dream. It's important to note that while the absolute numbers are high, the impact as a share of the total U.S. population is also something we should consider. So immigration has a range of potential economic effects, some of which are seen as benefits and others as potentially disruptive. On the benefits side, immigrants contribute to increased demand for local goods and services. They buy stuff locally where they live. That stimulates the local low-skilled labor market. Because remember, labor is derived. The demand for labor is derived. And so if there's more consumers buying things, that stimulates the low-skilled labor market. There's also generally a positive effect on taxes at the federal level. And higher-skilled immigrant workers often find jobs more quickly, which earns higher wages for them, and consequently, they pay more in taxes. However, there can also be disruptive effects. An increased supply of low-skilled labor due to immigration can, in theory, lower wages for domestic low-skill workers, although actual impact is the subject of ongoing debate amongst economists. It's also worth noting that legal minimum wages can help limit the extent of these wage reductions. We can't pay below the minimum wage no matter what the market wants us to pay. So immigration can finally have an impact on state and local government budgets as well, as these local governments and the levels of their cost of services like public education and infrastructure for new residents can increase because you've got all these new people you have to take care of. So let's look at a bit deeper into the impact of immigration on government budgets. At the federal level, research suggests that immigrants generally pay income and Social Security taxes, which often result in a net positive effect on the federal budget. This is particularly true for higher skilled immigrants with higher earnings potential. The picture can be a bit more complex at the state and local levels. Here, the costs of providing public services, like public schools and welfare programs to immigrant families, that might sometimes exceed the revenues that are generated through taxes at these levels, particularly in the short run as they're just getting into the country and they don't have much of a footing yet. However, these potential deficits can also be mitigated by taxes like sales taxes and property taxes that are paid by immigrants who are buying houses and paying for goods and services. So the long-term fiscal impacts at the state and local levels often depend on factors like the skills and the integration of immigrants and their specific policies that they have in place. Given the various economic and social impacts of immigration, there have been a lot of proposals for immigration reform. For example, the Jordan Commission in the 1990s has recommended prioritizing high-skill immigration as a way to minimize potential wage disruptions for low-skilled workers and to increase tax contributions. The DREAM Act is another well-known proposal that aimed to create a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as minors, but that has faced challenges in passing federally. Additionally, high-tech firms in the United States often advocate for more lenient policies to admit a greater number of highly skilled workers under programs like the H-1B visa program. All these proposals reflect different priorities, different perspectives on how immigration policy should work and how it should balance the economic needs, the social concerns, and the humanitarian considerations. When we look at current immigration policy perspectives, we see a range of approaches. We see restrictive policies like those emphasized by the Trump administration in his first term, and especially the restrictive policies in his second term. That's focused on deportations, building the border wall, and reducing the overall level of legal immigration. I don't even want to touch on this subject, but I feel like I have to. I know we're standing, I don't know when you'll be watching this video. I'm going to hopefully use this for a few years, but it's April 2025, and we are now deporting people without due process. We haven't proven these individuals have committed any crime, and we have deported at least now 2 individuals who should not have been deported, and we've sent them to a high security, maximum security prison in El Salvador. Now, these are not American citizens for deporting, but it does not matter because the U.S. Constitution does not guarantee due process for just U.S. citizens. It guarantees due process, meaning you have your day in court and you get to argue your case and the judge determines whether you're guilty or not. You get to advocate for yourself, or a lawyer will be appointed for you. You get due process just by being and existing within the borders of the United States, just by being in our borders. This is a guarantee to all people. And it is scary to think that we have a Supreme Court decision that says to the Trump administration, you must facilitate the return of these individuals who have been deported to an El Salvadoran prison without due process, who have protective orders from earlier cases saying they cannot be deported, that they're being processed through the system. They're here, and that's okay legally. And the Trump administration, at least as it stands today, is not complying with this order, which puts us on the cusp or already past the cliff of a constitutional crisis. And it's crazy. It really is. And I don't know how to not politicize this it is what it is. It's crazy. There's lots of arguments why, he's come up with to rationalize his actions, to say, the people voted for me to do this. But no president has the right to violate their oath to the Constitution. And the Constitution is pretty clear that due process applies to everyone. And when you revoke that due process, you don't follow through on that, you're in violation of the Constitution and your oath. His justification is that he's using a law from 1798, I believe, the Alien Immigration Act or something like that, Alien Enemies Act. His justification is that it is that we're at war. Effectively, we're at war with a certain MS-13, a certain gang from Venezuela. And his executive order that establishes that we're going to start deporting these MS-13 gang members without due process. The law allows you to not have due process for extreme situations like wartime. You know, we used the same law when we had Japanese internment camps during World War II. The Illegal Alien Act, or whatever the hell it's called, it's been, you know, the courts have told him you cannot use that. You cannot use that to deport these people to El Salvador, to that prison. So it is interesting legally to see how this is going to develop. It's interesting morally to see how this is being debated in the public sphere. It's interesting economically to see people, while they're at work, being grabbed up by plainclothes ICE agents, taken to unmarked black vans, never to be seen again, potentially, to be disappeared to an El Salvadoran prison, or anywhere else for that matter. It's scary times. It's scary times. So I told myself I would not get on my soapbox, and I apologize, but that is just something I cannot ignore. Hopefully, when you're watching this, some of you are going to watch this very soon. Some of you may watch this years from now. Hopefully things will have calmed down and we'll be at a place where these things are not happening, or at least the Constitution is not being trampled on. All right, last thing in this slide, and this is the last slide. We talked about restrictive policies, again, deportations, the border wall, reducing immigration. On the other hand, we also have inclusive policies like those that are sought by the previous administration under President Biden. He tended to favor a more positive approach through a significant, at one point he had the bipartisan immigration reform bill. That didn't pass because Trump killed it during his campaign. He said, Republicans, you can't vote for this. This is what I'm campaigning on. I need to be the one who determines this policy. Do not let him get away with this. Basically, it became very, very, very political. But still to this day, when we talk about what Trump is doing, it's always a reaction to what Biden did, right? That's how it gets rationalized. It's a reaction to Biden being too lenient, allowing too many people across the border. It is what it is. This is a very political topic right now. So anyway, this perspective, this restriction, this inclusion, whichever one you prefer, wherever you are on the spectrum, the perspective it highlights the contributions that immigrants have toward innovation, toward economic growth, toward the labor force, but also the societal aspects, the sociological aspects. There's a lot more than just their effects on the economy. And let's not forget, these are people, just like you and me. And that's it. That's the end of the chapter. Thank you all so much. I know this has been a long one. I will see you all in the next one. Chapter 15 is the final chapter in the microeconomics course. And if at any point in the future I decide to add some more, I just lied to you. But this is chapter 15 is going to be the last chapter, and that's going to focus more on income inequality and the poverty trap. And I think that's an extremely important topic. So that's where we're going to finish the class. Thank you all so much.